Welcome to the Critical Christian Podcast.
We're your hosts, Dan
and Justin. Here we ask critical questions about the Bible and provide questionable answers. Dan, this week we're going to be in Genesis 23, Genesis 24, and part of 25.
Yeah.
Dan, can you give the audience an overview of what happens in 23 and 24 since we don't have time to read the entirety of both chapters?
I sure can. Yeah, we start chapter 23 with the death of Sarah, who was Abraham's wife. It just talks about Abraham getting a burial plot and so on and so forth. Honestly, that was it. Then chapter 24, we have Isaac and Rebekah. This is talking about Isaac's wife, Rebekah, and how she was, for lack of a better word, obtained. And that is a pretty good word.
That's the right word. Wooed. I read a commentary that said, recalled the wooing of Rebekah, but I think that's awfully charitable.
Yes. Did they read the Bible when they said that? There was no wooing here. All right.
Bribing.
Yeah. Let's see. And then chapter 25 is the death of Abraham. And it just talks about Abraham. Oh, and apparently had 100 more kids after Sarah or something. It's really weird. And that's where we kind of stop, just in the middle of it, because, oh wait, we're going to Ishmael's sons too.
I think we're going to leave Ishmael out this week just because I want to go over the actual children of Ishmael next week, because we need to spend a little bit of time about Ishmael's children.
You think so?
Yeah.
I don't even see the relevance of their names.
That's the problem.
Is that there is a relevance, but I don't see it?
Yeah.
Really?
There's almost always relevance in the genealogies, and a lot of people just don't know any better, and it takes a lot of time actually to suss it out. Yeah, so we'll hit up the names next week.
All right. So then we should start with 23.
That's right, 23:1.
The death of Sarah.
Sarah lived to be 127 years old. And your first note there, Dan, was that...
so I guess Isaac was 27 when Sarah died?
I thought about correcting that for you in the notes so you didn't say that on air.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure he was 37. Nevertheless, maybe for this time period, 37 is a pinch old to be getting married for the first time. Do you think Abraham was concerned?
With what?
That that Isaac wasn't married yet at 37.
I honestly don't know, because apparently you can get married for the second time when you're 135 or something.
Yeah.
So
I mean
37 is actually pretty young compared to Abraham,
sure.
His second wife.
Sure. Although Isaac doesn't live nearly as long.
No. Because Abraham was 175 and Isaac was maybe 125.
Nevertheless, I just thought it was interesting that he was 37 in a time where a lot of people were trying to court a woman much earlier.
Yeah. Because wasn't Mary and Joseph 14 or something?
Yeah, well, Joseph most likely would have been older, but Mary certainly was young. The females got married really young. The men got married kind of whenever they could. So typically whenever they could, dependent on their financial status. Mm. In the case of Isaac, he could have afforded to get married at a very young age. But, some people in the ancient world waited until they gained a certain amount of wealth.
Yeah, I get that.
So they could support the family.
Yeah. All right. We're moving to 23 too.
That's right. She died at Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went to mourn for Sarah and to weep over her. There's some things that we need to say here. But first of all, he went to mourn for Sarah. Where was he? Were they not together?
Well, that's what I had been trying to figure out throughout this whole thing.
Where exactly are they?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for the most part they're in Hebron.
Okay.
But there's some confusing language about the Hittites, which we are going to get to. But First of all, we're still not allowed to go a single week without mentioning the giant clans of the Bible.
Really? I did not know.
You didn't realize they would show up here, huh?
Well, no. Where did I miss? Oh, the Anakim.
Yeah, the book of Joshua says, now the name of Hebron formerly was Kiriath Arba. This Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim, Joshua 14:15. Additionally, in Judges 1, it says, as Moses had promised, Hebron was given to Caleb, who drove it from the 3 sons of Anak. So the Anakim lived there until the conquest period. So they exited Egypt, and then they conquested the land. It took about 300 years, though. There seems to be at least a legend that the Anakim were in Hebron, which means Abraham and Sarah lived among the giants.
That's crazy.
I actually didn't... I knew a lot of locations where they turned up. I didn't realize they were in Hebron until I started to look up some of these names, because I read that she died in Kiriath Arba. I was like, well, I wonder if that is a location that was affiliated with Abraham's journey somewhere along the way. Like, have we heard this before? Is this an important location? Is there a reason why she died there? Like, is this important that she died there? And as I was reading the biblical references to that location, I was like, oh, the freaking giants were there. Is this foreshadowing that Abraham was given the land of Canaan, and part of the mission was to drive out the rest of the giants? And here we see, even though the promise isn't fulfilled yet, Abraham and Sarah are dwelling in the land of the giants that they will soon be taking over.
I feel like all this is just going way over my head, you know?
Yeah.
All these different city names, I just, you know.
Yeah. Well, you know, most people kind of look over them and they feel it's like an unimportant part of the story. But in the biblical case, a lot of it is a political document, and the geography does kind of become important. There's always a subtext, you know, to this, but also it does appear that, you know, most of the text that refer to these giant clans, what I could tell, you know, a lot of them are dated late. You know, like you'll see them in the Deuteronomist, which kind of makes me believe that the legend of the giants came actually much later and were superimposed on the text. What I'm saying is there seems to be a case that most of the texts concerning the Nephilim and their offspring appear to be late redactions to the text by people who already believed in the legends. So you had a question about the Hittites, huh?
So Sarah was a Canaanite?
I don't believe so. Remember, Sarah was the half sister of Abraham, and Abraham came from Ur.
Okay, it's just, but she died in Canaan.
That's right. Because remember, that land was promised to be theirs one day.
So they decided they would just go ahead and live in it anyhow?
Yeah. That's part of the promise, right?
They're like, hey, this will be my land one day anyhow. I might as well just set up shop.
Well, remember, it was part of the promise. You know, God said to, you know, walk with me and be blameless. And God led him into Canaan, and that's where he remained, even though maybe he would have been more comfortable back home during the death of his sister wife and then himself.
So why didn't he want Isaac to marry anybody from Canaan if he lived there?
Well, because they were wicked.
Oh, but he lived there.
Well,
but they were wicked.
He had to live there. It was part of the promise of God. God was going to give him the land, and you start small. I mean, he could have moved back home and waited till he procreated for 400 years and then tried to take over the land. I guess that's an option. But it seems to me like God had an alternative plan in mind. He did get, you know, he got quite a bit of favor among the Canaanites.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that. All right, whatever. So why did the Hittites live in Canaan? Also, who were the Hittites?
The term Hittite kind of shows up all over the place in the Bible. Also shows up as the son of Het, And of course, the Hittites just got their name from their forefather Heth. So Het is the second son of Canaan in Genesis 10:15. So we see part of the confusion also stems from the book of Joshua, which kind of describes the inheritance of the promised land and also describes the land of the Hittites being outside of that land. So it says, from the wilderness and this Lebanon, even unto the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and unto the great sea towards the going down of the sun shall be your border. So in this particular example, the land of the Hittites is outside. So it seems that in Joshua's time period, they knew of the sons of Het, and they probably also knew of the people from Hatti. And the Bible doesn't do a really good job of differentiating the two people groups.
All right. That answered my question, I presume. All right. What's next?
Genesis 23:10 through 16.
Ephraim the Hittite was sitting among his people, and he replied to Abraham in the hearing of all the Hittites who had come to the gate of his city. No, my lord, he said, listen to me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of my people. Bury your dead. Again, Abraham bowed down before the people of the land, and he said to Ephraim in their hearing, listen to me, if you will. I will pay the full price of the field. Accept it from me so I can bury my dead there. Ephraim answered Abraham, listen to me, my lord. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver. But what is that between you and me? Bury your dead. Abraham agreed to Ephron's terms and weighed out for him the price he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver, according to the weight current among the merchants.
Fantastic. And so that's actually a lot of money.
You think so?
It's a ton of money.
Oh.
So it may be about $120,000 to $150,000 in today's money. My point is this. Ephron went from I will give you the land for free to I need you to pay approximately 4 times its value. I don't know for sure, how large the land was, but it just seems to me that if you were sincere in getting rid of the land for free, you're just, because you're that nice of a person, you wouldn't have charged 400 shekels. That's just a very large amount. And
I don't know. The way I read it is that he was like, okay, listen, you want to know the value, it's worth 400 shekels. But seriously, what's that between you and me? And so it was really Abraham who kept on pushing it, and he's like, fine, just here's what it's worth. Just give me the money. Let's call it a day,
What if it was a large property and maybe it was worth 400 shekels? But it would seem out of place for Abraham to ask for such a large field just to bury his dead. If you're going to ask for a burial plot, you kind of ask for something that is, for that purpose, really.
How come he didn't just bury her on his land?
Oh, that's a really good question I didn't consider. Well, what was his land? It's clear he wanted to put her into a cave or maybe a catacomb of some nature.
Why?
Well, see, what you do is you would put your dead into the cave or the catacomb, and in there, their body would, it would go through the natural process of decay, but you could also go and visit the dead and present offerings to the dead. This was part of the ancient, burial customs, because they believed that you needed to care for your ancestors.
How many caves do you think there were around there?
It couldn't have been that many. I mean, I'm sure there were some, but a lot of times you'd have one large system of caves where many, many people would put their dead. A whole city might utilize a small system of caves.
Are you saying back then people didn't bury their dead in the ground?
Well, they could eventually. They didn't always put them in the ground right away. They would put them in the cave for a time, and then when it was just bones left, they sometimes would put the bones into boxes, and they would actually keep the bones with the family, or they would bury the bones somewhere meaningful.
All right. What's next?
23:17 through 18.
Let's do it. So Ephron's field in Machpelah near Mamre, both the field and the cave in it, and all the trees within the borders of the field was deeded to Abraham as his property in the presence of all the Hittites who had come to the gate of the city. As true now as it was back then. Well, I just thought it was interesting to see the way business was conducted before, I presume, written contracts and all that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I was hoping we get to that. I think that is a testimony to this story actually maybe being from the time period, because everybody other than the people living in the Levant, the Egyptians, the people living north in Phoenicia, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, they all had systems of writing, and they all would have made some sort of receipt. But here we see that everything is done without writing, and there's this a bonding contract between witnesses and nothing more, which means in this time period, I can only imagine the Canaanites, or for the most part, weren't writing things down. And that would certainly account for the fact that we have so few archaeological discoveries from this time period in Canaan.
We have some?
We have some. Yeah, we've got a couple old Phoenician scripts, a couple, Paleo-Hebrew manuscripts, but not much.
Right? All right.
Let's read 24:2. He said to the senior servant in his household, the one in charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh.
Yeah, I bet of all the people, this guy was the most unhappy with Isaac's birth, because otherwise he would have gotten everything when Abraham died.
Yeah, that's my assumption. It's kind of a kick in the pants, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It does seem a little insulting that the man who lost his inheritance now has to go find a wife.
Oh, yeah.
As if Isaac couldn't do it himself.
Right, yeah.
And why is this my task? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think that speaks to Eleazar's character and why Abraham at one point was going to consider him the heir to his dynasty. Right?
And now he gets nothing.
Right. It's important to point out as well that we are making the bold assumption that this is Eleazar, even though his name doesn't appear in the text.
Okay. Only
because he showed up earlier in Genesis as the heir of Abraham and the head of the household. And unless there's a new head of the household, we're assuming it's still Eleazar.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that was Genesis 15:2, but Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eleazar of Damascus. All right, first of all, let's just get one thing clear. I don't think we are putting hands underneath people's thighs today when we're swearing oaths.
I mean, I assumed it was just what they did back then. I guess, at first I thought I would read into it, but I'm like, that was probably pretty normal.
Yeah, it's not actually all that normal. You don't see this very often. It only shows up one other time. The swearing an oath is ubiquitous throughout the Old Testament. It's all over the Old Testament. And only twice do we see anybody putting a hand under anybody's thigh. So let's look at the words here real quick. The Hebrew word yiraki basically means thigh. However, it's not specific as to whether or not it's the inside or the outside of the thigh. This is seen in Exodus 32:27, Judges 3:16, and others, where the outside of the thigh is being spoken of, like putting the sword on your thigh for fighting. It's clearly referring to the outside of the leg. This is very common usage in the Old Testament, and it's also combined with the word kaf in Genesis 32 to refer to the hip socket. Now, unfortunately, in Genesis 46, it's also translated as Jacob's loins, or his loins, more specifically. My first inclination was that when it was used to refer to genitals, it would show up in the Old Testament in the form of a plural. So it might be thighs, but it doesn't. It actually shows up when it refers to a man's seed sac, it shows up in the singular, which is really interesting. In Genesis 42:26, it shows up in the singular form when it refers to Jacob's loins. Now, there's an instance where it shows up specifically referring to the descendants of somebody. So in Exodus 1:5, the word is joined with Jacob, saying Yarak or Yerek, Yaakov, and it's translated as the descendants of Jacob. So here it's saying literally thigh of Jacob. Now we have to assume that this is an idiom, meaning the descendants that came from between his thighs. So we have to ask ourselves, where did Eleazar put his hand when he gave this oath? Either under his thigh, literally, or under his seed sack. Now, this is where things get interesting, because in Genesis 47:29, we see the same ritual with Jacob.
Okay.
Where Jacob causes a family member to take an oath by placing his hand under his Yerek. And both these cases, what do these two men have in common? God promised them many descendants.
Okay.
So in keeping with the theme, there's a small chance that Eleazar is cupping Abraham's seed sack in the process of making this oath. And it would be a very fitting ritual. It's not uncommon to swear an oath and do it with an item of symbology. For example, swearing an oath, often we would do on the name of a god, or like
the Bible, right?
A hand on the Bible, right?
Oh, I did know what you meant.
It's not just good enough that you swear on the name of your God. You actually place your hand on the Bible, right? And here, Eleazar is tasked in the oath to protect the line that comes from Abraham, his descendant, his seed.
Okay.
That's the entire point of this oath, is to verify that the seed of Abraham is not corrupted. So where else would you put your hand during the oath than on the seed holder itself? So does that mean that Eleazar is also Abraham's cupbearer?
Right, right.
The attendant of the cup? I don't know. That was a terrible joke. All right, let's move on.
Yes,
I think I've had enough of Abraham's ball sack.
All right.
You know they didn't shower, right?
Okay. Well, they must have done something.
Well, I mean, their hygiene was rough. But, I mean, since we're on the topic, we might as well just address it. If he was touching Abraham's goodie pouch, they weren't clean.
Yeah, and he was, 150 at the time or something?
I mean, it's not a pretty picture.
No.
It's just not. The whole thing is, you see why in the Hebrew they use idioms so that people don't have to picture it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
can you imagine it just like sticking to one side? Because it'd be all sweaty. All right.
Yes, they're living in the Judean desert, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to be a nightmare out there.
Uh-huh.
That's why they wore robes. I wouldn't want to wear pants out there either. I'd wear a robe and air that thing out.
I like that after doing all this, he doesn't get any inheritance either.
Right. Okay. There's such a good point. Listen, Eleazar not only has to find a wife for his replacement, but he's up here cupping Abraham's yahoos, and he gets nothing. He gets nothing for it. Maybe a thank you?
Maybe.
I don't know. He gets released from the oath, and that's it.
Right.
Yeah. Which, remember, in ancient times, if you make an oath and you don't fulfill it, you have to take on the curses of that oath. The deity that the oath was sworn by is going to make sure you're held to account in your guilt. So it was his utmost important task to make sure the oath was fulfilled, so he was not in breakage of the oath.
Well, it said if he couldn't do it, he could just be done with it, right? It didn't say he was going to break it.
That's actually a really good point. He never intended on breaking the oath, but how much of it was really in his control, anyways?
None of it, maybe.
Right? Is because even in the passage, it's God's providence that is supposed to bring about the woman. Remember, it's the angel. It says, as you pointed out, the angel of the Lord is going to show you.
Yeah.
Even though the angel of the Lord never actually showed up to do it.
Yeah. I was hoping you could explain that one.
Yeah. I think it was just an editing mistake.
Huh?
I think there was multiple versions of this story, and they got put together, and it was just an oversight. The angel of the Lord was going to be present, and then never was.
I mean, is it possible the angel just went on ahead of him? They were talking about how Abraham and all them were blessed by God and all that. And so it's possible that they just knew that because he's Abraham. But it's also possible an angel came ahead and said, hey guys, I'm an angel. Abraham's, a good guy.
Yeah, it's certainly possible that the angel went, quote, before them, as it says in the text.
Right.
And sort of did some behind the scenes working.
Yeah, kind of like John the Baptist, right?
Yeah.
Came before Jesus, to
make straight the path.
Yep.
Yeah.
Maybe this is foreshadowing for Jesus.
Somehow. I mean, maybe. Maybe.
I also like how when you talked about the angel, you said it was the invisible guiding hand of providence.
It might be. Is that an accurate description of what could have happened?
I think maybe.
Yeah.
Just subtly, nudging them in the right direction or something,
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I understand how it's weird that they didn't really mention the angel again. But again, it did say the angel was going ahead of him. And so I guess I wasn't surprised when the angel wasn't there.
Yeah. The angel went ahead, did his work, and got out.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair way to read the text. I can see no issue with that.
Okay. 24:8, it says, if the woman is unwilling to come back with you, then you will be released from this oath of mine.
Oh. I forgot about that part. But that's had nothing to do with whether or not she's Canaanite, which seems odd. Since the oath was that you wouldn't let Isaac marry a son from the daughters of the Canaanites, it seems odd that he would be released from the oath if whoever he found was unwilling to return with him.
Why? I mean, he's basically saying, hey, don't force her or anything.
That's what I'm saying, is the original oath is not about a specific woman.
Okay.
It's not about her, Rebekah. It's about Isaac. I won't let Isaac marry someone from among the Canaanites.
Mm-hmm.
If he goes and finds somebody for Isaac and the woman for Isaac doesn't come back, he didn't actually fulfill his promise yet. He still has to marry somebody, and he still has to make sure that she's not a Canaanite.
Yeah, but I mean, it means he's like, at least you tried. I'm not going to curse you for eternity. It's not really much of an oath, but it just seemed nice.
That's a really good point, because on the face of it, the original part of the oath seemed harsh. How could you really control
right? Yeah,
Isaac ends up marrying? So to give him this kind of an out does seem to be softening the whole situation.
Yeah,
that's a good point. I didn't notice that. That's why we got two of us. All right, Dan, let's do 24:16. The woman was very beautiful, a virgin. No man had ever slept with her. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up again. So now the servant, the 10 camels, and a few others are at the well where they meet Rebekah for the first time. And Interestingly enough, somehow they know that she's a virgin.
Oh. Hey, wait, how would they know that?
I don't think the narrator knew it.
Yeah. That's an interesting point, actually.
I don't know how they would know it.
I guess probably just because it makes for a better story, right?
It does. Well, I think it adds to the allure of Rebekah, why she was so special for Isaac.
Mm-hmm.
You would ask them whether or not this passage might be a source for why people put a prize on virgins, why they're so valued.
Right.
And, it's my understanding that in the ancient world, not just here in the Levant, but everywhere in the ancient world, virgins were considered pure and unsullied. And in fact, in ancient Babylon, when performing incantations and spells, even the parchment in which the spell or the curse or the incantation was written down on had to be made from virgin animal skin. In the ancient mind, a woman who was not a virgin was, we'll say, defiled. Which, such a terrible way, such an unbiological way to view the whole process, especially since we know that in terms of defilement, sexually transmitted diseases go both ways equally. They obviously didn't really understand how sexually transmitted diseases and things worked.
Right.
Let's move on to 22 and 23.
When the camels had finished drinking, the man took out a gold nose ring weighing a Rebekah. And her name is Rebekah. That's funny. And 2 gold bracelets weighing 10 shekels. Then he asked, "Whose daughter are you? Please tell me. Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?"
Oh boy. All right, so there's a lot happening here. I don't know why I never noticed it before, but I noticed it when I read it this time. And that is, as soon as the camels finished drinking, the man, we're assuming Eleazar, just took out a gold nose ring and bracelets and was just like, boom, let's put these on your face. You know what I mean? It seems odd to me that it seems like a strange proposition. Like, hey, since you watered my camels, here's a bunch of gold. And as far as we can tell, she does put the nose ring on, put the jewelry on, and then is presented when she gets home wearing that stuff.
I mean, initially I was going to mention a gold nose ring. What? But then I realized that probably was just one of those things they did back then. Yeah.
Nose rings, earrings, these types of things are actually quite popular in the ancient world. In fact, we know that even up to the Babylonian exile and beyond, nose rings were popular among Jewish women. The authors of the Talmud actually had some regulations against wearing them on the Sabbath because they believed that the nose ring is among the rings you could put on your face. The nose ring was easily infected, and in a culture where purity is everything, we see in the Talmud and in the Mishnah specifically that there were some precautions against wearing them on the Sabbath.
Did all women just have pierced noses, like ready and waiting?
So that's why I don't know. And that's what's confusing about this passage is if they had to pierce this piece of the nose to install it, she would have already had to have it pierced.
Right.
Or else you're not just going to let a stranger walk up, jam a piece of gold through your nose, bleed all over the place, and be like, yeah, let's go home and meet my dad. Did they bring the nose ring because it was so common they just assumed whoever it was had to have one? Or did they bring it just in case whoever they met just happened to have a nose ring and would like to have one?
I think it was probably the first one.
Yeah.
That it was just the thing to do.
It was very, very common, which is ironic because there's so much flack in the modern church about piercings.
Yeah.
Like okay, there are two things that I heard nonstop as a teenager is that you shouldn't have piercings and you shouldn't have drums in church.
Piercings and drums. Okay.
Turns out almost all of the instruments of the Old Testament were percussion instruments.
Of course.
And almost all of God's people had piercings.
Yeah.
And so, once again, it's a case of people in the church not actually reading the Bible. There's a lot of unlearning you have to do when you read the Bible for yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
Even just in our short time here doing Genesis, how much have you learned where you're like, oh, I feel like we would have had to talk about that in church, but it never comes up.
Almost everything.
I'm not a fan of the Reformed movement, but I'll give the Reformed movement one point, and that is they're one of the few denominations that do a good job about like saying we're going to preach through an entire book. We're going to do all of Genesis or all of Judges or whatnot. They're really good about that kind of thing, whereas other denominations are not. But my complaint, of course, is they ignore the difficult books. They won't go through Leviticus. They won't do Numbers. You know, they might do some of Deuteronomy. And those are actually really important books that people will skip over because they're boring. But they're not actually boring once you understand what all the laws were for. And luckily, that was my specialty in seminary, so
we'll get into it in 2 years.
That's right. I'm actually learning a lot as we're doing the book of Genesis because I only read Genesis front to back every couple of years. And every couple of years I learn something new. Whereas in the laws, I've been through the laws many, many times. I still learn something new every time I go through them, but I feel more confident going into them because I in my mind, I already know what they are. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what any of them are.
I know. That's why I specialized in that part of the Old Testament in seminary because nobody reads them. I'm kind of like, well, it kind of seems fun and mysterious.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, if you're the only one, you're automatically an expert.
That's right. Who's going to tell you you're wrong? Let's do 24-25.
All right. And she added, we have plenty of straw and fodder, as well as room for you to spend the night.
Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Is this considered fine living or something? I mean, obviously Rebekah and her family were also well off, right?
I think so.
It felt like that for some reason.
Right. That was the impression I got. So they're able to take in 10 camels and probably multiple servants. I would imagine if you brought 10 camels, you had more than one servant with those camels. But the interesting thing is we will learn in 24:61 that Rebekah has at least one maidservant that goes with her. So they could afford at least a maidservant. But what is interesting is Rebekah was the one that went out and drew the water. If you had a really wealthy household like Abraham's, you're not sending your daughter out to draw water. You're sending a maidservant. In Genesis 24:21, we see
Rebekah's
brother.
I think it was his brother.
Laban. Come you who are blessed by the Lord, he said. Why are you standing out here? I have prepared the house and a place for the camels. And you said, how does this guy know that he is blessed by God? My understanding is that probably the riches, the wealth, the gold, the camel. This is the part where we have to get real about the televangelists, because the ancient Near East, if you were wealthy, it was because you were blessed by God. God would never bless the unrighteous.
Are they still talking about the Christian God?
Well, that's a tough one. I wanted to talk about that one as well, because it says, come you who are blessed by the Lord, Yahweh. In the Bible, almost every time you see the word the Lord, especially if Lord is all caps, it's referring to Yahweh. Now, there is some translations will do Lord in all caps, and that is referring to Yahweh, or they'll do Lord regular, and that is referring to the word Adonai. Now, let's just get one thing out of the way. We don't know at all if Yahweh has appeared to Laban or his father.
Right.
In fact, as far as the Bible leads us to believe, nobody knew God's real name of Yahweh until Exodus chapter 3, where it's given to Moses. The fact of the matter remains that nobody in the narrative of Isaac should have known the name Yahweh to begin with. This Isaac narrative had to have been a Yahwistic text from the southern tribes. And we see the same thing in the beginning of Genesis, where it says that so-and-so called on the name of the Lord, called on the name Yahweh. Well, clearly they didn't. I mean, they must have called on the name they thought was Yahweh's name, but it couldn't have been Yahweh because they didn't know it. So, nevertheless, this is kind of one of those pretty glaring anachronisms that that you learn about really quick when you go to Bible college or seminary. Yeah, it's a wild one, huh?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's early in the Bible, and nobody talks about it.
Right. The name Yahweh is all over the place. So, either Exodus 6 is a political document and probably not all that correct, or this just wildly anachronistic, and a bunch of editors went crazy in the Pentateuch and messed a bunch of stuff up, which is probably not what happened. The section in Exodus 6 where it explains that the name Yahweh had not been revealed, but that Elohim's name is actually Yahweh. Well, I'm saying the explanation of God's real name being Yahweh and not El Shaddai or Elohim or any of the El variants was likely a later invention added into the Exodus narrative for people who wanted to understand why some of our ancestors worshipped Elohim and some of them worshipped Yahweh, which is probably the best way to square that round peg is, no, you don't worship different gods. They're actually the same God, they just had two different names. Right.
Okay. Genesis 55?
24:55. Let's do it.
But her brother and her mother replied, "Let the young woman remain with us for 10 days or so, and then you may go." And my question is, how come they wanted her to remain for 10 days? And more importantly, why was she not allowed? I mean, here's the thing. They probably wanted her to remain so she could say goodbye to everybody. And I mean, honestly, that's fine. That makes sense. The only question is why, they couldn't let her.
Right.
She's like, you got to get out now.
Right. So here's the thing. I have two thoughts. One, on why they wanted her to stay was in addition to what you said, because I think what you said is the number one reason, but also I think because maybe they wanted to inspect these men before they just sent her away. Like, I know they brought a bunch of jewelry and some gold and they look pretty dang wealthy, but maybe we should make sure they're not axe murderers first.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's a protective instinct, but why the urgency? And the only thing I could think of is, one, Abraham's in his old age. Could he not wait 10 days? Probably. But nevertheless, Abraham is in his old age. Number two, the man is trying to get out of his oath. And the sooner you get out, the better.
Why is that a big deal again?
Well, because if you mess up your oath, you could be cursed by the gods.
Now, we're talking about the God, right? But God wouldn't curse people for breaking their oath.
Yeah, he would. It's literally part of the 10 Commandments.
Which one?
Do not take the Lord's name in vain.
And if you do, you'll be cursed?
It says, he who takes the name of the Lord in vain will not go unpunished from his guilt.
Unpunished from his guilt.
It's actually a rough paraphrase. I apologize. I don't know the exact phraseology of it. But nevertheless, there is an implication that if you break your oath, you will be held account because of your guilt. And that is the whole point of swearing an oath. In fact, every contract of the ancient world, whether it was a marriage contract, a land contract, so on and so forth, was done under the name of a deity. So if you breached your contract, that deity would punish you for doing so.
Okay.
So nevertheless, breaking your oath was believed to be a severe issue because you could invoke the wrath of the deities upon you. What is interesting is in the contract to buy land that Abraham did, we didn't hear them swear by the names of any deities.
Right.
But that 9 times out of 10 is how it happens.
Yeah.
In fact, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples of this from the collection of cuneiform clay tablets that we have from various nations.
So Eleazar was ready to get this done with, huh?
I think so.
And yet, as I said, I mean, you're telling me that oaths are a huge deal. So it sounds even nicer of Abraham to give him an out.
Right. Yeah, and that's why when you brought it up, it seems like Abraham softening the blow, because being held under a curse was quite problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Any number of problems could happen. You could have your lineage cut off from you. So yeah, being held to a curse was a really bad thing.
Okay.
Let's do 24:26.
24:61.
That's what I meant to say.
All right. Then Rebekah and her attendants got ready and mounted the camels and went back with the man. So the servant took Rebekah and left. So this lady had her own servants?
Apparently.
And they also just had to up and leave in the middle of the night? I mean, they probably had families too, right?
It's highly likely. And I jotted down a number of laws from the Bible and from the rest of the ancient Near East on how slave families were treated.
Mm-hmm.
So we can have maybe a little bit of backdrop on why this seems so completely normal. The servants are just going to be plucked up out of their household and taken somewhere else. This seems to not be a problem whatsoever to the ancient world.
Shocking.
Exodus 21, we have 2 different laws pertaining to servants. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he is to serve you for 6 years. But in the 7th year, he shall go free without paying anything. If he comes alone, he is to go free alone. But if he has a wife when he comes, she is to go with him. If his master gives him a wife, meaning a maidservant, and she bears him sons or daughters, the woman and her children shall belong to her master, and only the man shall go free. So that's quite interesting. This here is suggesting that certainly maidservants and their children were more or less property of the master. Even if they do marry, the master can dictate where they go and where they don't go. And that would certainly count if you had a child that got married, whoever their particular maidservant was, you can demand that they go with them. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not be freed as the male slaves are. If she proves to be displeasing to her master, who designated her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. He shall not have the right to sell her to outsiders, since he broke faith with her. And if he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her as is the practice with free maidens. If he marries another, he must not withhold from this one her food, her clothing, or her shelter. If he fails her in these 3 ways, she shall go free. So here, the maidservant, the female slave, is able to be given at will to somebody to marry. In the Laws of Hammurabi 117, it says, if a debt overtakes a man and he sells his wife, son, or daughter, or gives them over to slavery, 3 years in the house of their buyer or master shall they serve. In the 4th, they shall go free. Now, remember, in the law of Moses we read in Exodus, after 6 years you go free. Here in the law of Hammurabi, after 3 years you go free. again, as we mentioned in a previous episode, everyone says that the laws of Moses were more gentle and loving than the laws of the people around them. And that's not really true. They're, for the most part, pretty contemporary. Some places are better and some places they're worse. Now, here's the part that is important to the passage of Rebekah's maidservant, Hammurabi Law 175. If a state slave or the slave of a free man marry the daughter of a free man, and the children are born, the master of the slave shall have no right to enslave the children of the free. So, another law from Hammurabi dealing with slaves in the form of marriage is actually more lenient than the law of Moses.
A lot more lenient.
So the practice of Abraham and his family seemed to match what we see in the laws of Moses, less what we see in the law of Hammurabi.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the law in Eshnuna, Law 22, if a man has no claim against another man, but nevertheless seizes the other man's slave girl, the owner of the slave girl shall declare under oath, "Thou shalt not claim against me," and he shall pay him silver in full compensation for the slave girl. So here, if a man steals a slave girl and the slave girl says, "No, I'm owned by another,"
Mm-hmm.
there is compensation that is paid to the slave girl's original master, but there is no apology or compensation given to the slave girl who was stolen by another man. Law 23, if a man has no claim against another man, but nevertheless distrains the other man's slave girl, detains the distrainee in his house, or causes her death, he shall give 2 slave girls to the owner of the slave girl as a replacement. So here, the life of the slave girl seems to be somewhat meaningless here in the laws of Eshnuna. And then the very last law, Eshnuna 31, if a man deprives another man's slave girl of her virginity, he shall pay 1/3 of a mina of silver. The slave girl remains the property of her owner. So if a man assaults a slave girl of another owner, he has to pay that owner because he's deprived that girl of her virginity. But in no way is that slave girl going to be compensated, apologized to, or in any way find retribution for what was done to her. I say all that to say this. Slave girls in the ancient world didn't really have any rights.
Yeah, most women didn't. So
that's somewhat true. Now, I want to say this. For a very long time, there's no way we're getting chapter 25, but I want to say this. For a very long time, I was under the impression, because I've been told endlessly by people, that women in the ancient Near East couldn't inherit property. They couldn't own anything. They were basically just treated like property. It's not exactly true. There's a lot of cases. I went through some of the ancient Near Eastern law codes recently, and I went through a lot of palace documents. So basically receipts from the cuneiform tablet collections. So all the Babylonians, the Assyrians, so on and so forth. And there were a lot of receipts of women that were dealing in property, that were buying and selling goods, and that were making, say, agreements for barter. And there were quite a few land contracts where a man is leaving his property to either his daughters, his soon-to-be widow, or to another female. And so I found probably 30 or 40 examples pretty quickly running through my collection. And I'm inclined to believe at this point that women were not as destitute as we like to believe in the ancient world. Mm-hmm. That's not to say that they weren't quite often, because if you didn't come from money, there was no way you could acquire these things, which means you were treated like property. Mm-hmm. But certainly for any woman who came from a means, you could find your way in the world as long as you had the money to do it with. So there's that.
There is that.
It's going to be fun when we get to Exodus in 3.5 years.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
We're actually halfway done with Genesis.
That's terrible.
Yeah, we have some really fun stories coming up. I cannot wait to get to the war of procreation between Jacob's wives. That's a fun one. And we get magic soon.
Ooh.
Yep, we get magic spells and rituals and things.
And I have a lot to say about Joseph.
Yeah. Ooh, dude, Joseph's, he's a kind of guy.
Yeah, very special.
Yeah. So anyways, thanks for watching, right? Yeah.
Yeah, stay tuned. You don't want to miss the other stuff we're going to talk about.
We have got a lot of fun stories coming up, and there's a lot of questions buried in these stories. For example, who in the world did Jacob wrestle with? Was it really God? Was it really? I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to come to that text specifically with the intent to answer that question.
Like and subscribe.
Cheers.
Cheers. All right. Bye, guys. Remember Anakim?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, you remember Anakin Skywalker?
I don't. I didn't watch the movies.
Oh. All right. I'm going to read it real quickly.
Read it with gusto.
I'm not sure I can do both. Ephraim the Hittite was sitting among his people, and he replied to Abraham in the hearing of all the Hittites who had come to the gate of his city. No, my lord, he said, listen to me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of my people. Bury your dead. What? I said it all, though, in one breath. You just want to read it together?
Sure.
All right. So Ephraim's field in Machpelah near Mamre, both the field and the cave in it, and all the trees within the borders of the field was deeded to Abraham as his property in the presence of all the Hittites who had come to the gate of the city.
Should we read that one through seriously?
I thought I was serious. Maybe you weren't serious. I mean, I'm more of a cologne man myself as well, so.
You don't bathe, you splash?
Yeah. I'm cutting that out.
Juice?
What?
Bis dann? Auf Wiedersehen?
I'm going to cut all that out.
I would cut all of it out.
Wait, the whole video?
Yeah, just blank it.
All right.
I just wipe out the video altogether and leave the audio.
Oh, actually, that might be good.
That's my best look.